It's summer, and I'm thinking about Dark Souls. Okay, but first, so the Bonadori is a minigame from Rhythm Tengoku, a game for the GBA. That's a rhythm game based on the dance performed at the Obon Festival in the summer in Japan. The Obon is this big, vibrant festival that is itself an observance of the spirits of the dead. That is kind of the heart of the cultural fixations on summer as a collection of traditions, festivals, things to do with the months and months of brutal heat. It is no surprise me sitting here eating iconic summertime sushi and shaved ice, thinking about festivals that I am in fact a summer hater. On the basic levels, the temperature, the humidity in redacted New Jersey, the sheer amount of bugs I have a stark phobia over. It is easily my least favorite season. Least favorite enough that I'm writing this while listening to a Therian album that's so powerfully winter-coded and trying not to cry a third time to it, all while my AC is blasting. No, summer is never an active season for me. It is, in many ways, a season of memory. My parents often struggled with getting me to do anything. Inertia, autism, whatever it is that makes sudden changes to my schedule has been the major factor, all magnified by the summer's humid, overwhelming heat. Wow, I really have just, sped run talking about all my brain stuff here. I hope I'm going somewhere with this. Memory. See, my early youth was spent with summer being bookended by saying goodbye to my parents at the start, to my grandmother at the end. And yes, my grandmother's house is one of beautiful excess, a pantry full of candy, free time to play games, to learn old recipes of hers, playing card games, going to raging rivers, while my mom's places were always transient. Moving all over the country, new schools, new states, new apartments and houses, mounting schoolwork and punishments as I struggled to keep working, moving from gifted classes to bizarre, inscrutable classes hosted over lunch periods. I should find my summers joyous, an introverted bacchanal of earthly pleasures and simple comforts and a grandmother that loves me. And yet, I wept every time I had to leave my mom's place, explicitly because I couldn't bear saying goodbye. Emotion without even really thinking. How could I? My memories cling desperately to what can be salvaged over the ravages of time, and time is nothing if not a ravager. My grandmother's house doesn't exist anymore. She died years ago from complications from dementia. Her house sold, ripped from our lives, our experiences. No more can I sit at the dining room table while she makes me coconut shrimp, even though she had an allergy to shellfish. All my memories of my grandmother retain this kind of angelic flawlessness, gently scrubbing away at the sparse times she was upset with me or cross. In contrast, my mother in my early life memory is a tangle of strict rulings, being too busy to spend time with me, and these profoundly tender, beautiful moments. Her singing me to sleep, her comforting me through a tornado warning, her coming to my defense when my high school history teacher was determined to fail me. That she loves me and has loved me all my life is clear as day. And every day I feel the particulars slip through my claws, the recesses of my mind sticking to inexplicable elements, things I wonder if I'll ever forget, even as they hold less and less meaning to me. That is summer to me, reflecting on these things I have lost while living out this bizarre reality I've somehow carved out for myself. The world is ending outside. My rent will continue to be due. My apartment may never truly get clean. And I'm here thinking about Dark Souls. Dark Souls 2 is also thinking about Dark Souls. Contrary to the previous title, people have actually realized that this is a sequel title, not the third in a trilogy, and as a result has made comparing things to Dark Souls almost more of a cultural touchstone than Dark Souls itself. For as much as we can talk about Lords of the Fallen, Lies of P, Stranger of Paradise, Claire of Obscure as kind of like Dark Souls 2 in a way immortalizes that. Suddenly, we could not just take Dark Souls as is, this fixation point in our deeply ill gamer brains, but instead tried to, by contrast, refine and distill what it means to be Dark Souls. Is Dark Souls 2 a good game? That has been a starkly divisive point among those of us concerned about the catalog of FromSoft titles we've dubbed to be Souls games without their input. I would again here point to our original sinner, our Demon's Souls, to really highlight what it is that the series came from, that the Dark Souls trilogy is largely building off of to best understand it, but I would be among pretty slim company in doing so. Joseph Anderson mentions Demon's Souls not at all in his videos on DS2, which of course means we inevitably have to look at the video series Mahler did for answers. I'm joking, of course, I'm not watching Mahler, you have to trust me a little more than that. As much as I hate talking about people talking about Dark Souls in the middle of my big, poetic, weird videos on these games, I come at this one not out of obligation, but passion, because there was a minorly famous subcultural event tied to the game's discourse, where one H-Bomber guy did a pretty lengthy video on Dark Souls 2, responding largely to Matthew Matosis's criticisms, in fact, responding largely to Matthew Matosis's criticisms of the game, and after rewatching those and Joseph Anderson's vids because I'm hateful and not Mahler's because he sucks, I can say that while H-Bomb is the least wrong about it, and also the most entertaining, seemingly most everyone on YouTube is kind of wrong about this game. Let me try and explain. I think I'm going to be kind and shelve Anderson's critiques since he hasn't really evolved past his Dark Souls videos. He likes it when the game makes him feel smart and good at combat, and calls it bad design when it doesn't. Matthew Matosis here is in a weird position as kind of an infamous bit of DS2 paratext, as someone who made some really popular criticisms of the game, and then was eclipsed by then smaller-time YouTuber H-Bomb's eventual popularity by essentially unraveling Matthew's pivotal arguments. But I do think that H-Bomb's efforts ended up being something of an overcorrection. I remember watching these videos long before I played these games myself, and was left with the impression that Demon's Souls and Dark Souls were these kind of poorly designed games in critical areas, and not the actual experiences that I had, not the actual games themselves. And yet, I don't know. Rewatching Matthew's video just feels rote now. That he's bad at understanding this game feels inconsequential, a thing to talk about just to talk about it. That it is just the thing that a video on Dark Souls simply must do. Is the combat good, better or worse than the first one? Is the game too flooded with crowds of enemies? I came into this, spent hours of my life listening to Anderson, Matthew, H-Bomb in order to see if I have a real take to weigh in on here. Again, in a very real way, discourse about the game supersedes the game itself online, and I don't know what I'm doing here. Typing up some pithy remarks about the game's combat, a thing I've always kind of resisted doing because I've never really invested in my own thoughts around gameplay. I've spent years trying to give a cool, understandable, easy explanation why, that I care more about the game's ideas, stories, themes, aesthetics, that I'm not a game designer, but ultimately, I think it is a genuine distrust of my own tastes here. I love the combat in every Souls game I've ever played, which is all of them, but if I were to try and weigh in on it being somehow good design, I'd start to fall apart on the spot, you know? Like I know that I have weird tastes that often brushed up against other people's online growing up, and I eventually just took it to mean that I don't have a good or reliable relationship with game mechanics. I'm aware of the changes made from DS1 to DS2, but they've never struck me as something that needed to be in the Thunderdome to gauge which one is better. When I think about all the discourse about adaptability, about the fall damage, the really slow Estus flask drinking, whether or not the life gems ruin the game entirely, and yet also the game is bullshit unfair in places anyway, huh, Joseph? Look, all I really think about is how interesting it makes the game. Contrary to the first game, where going hollow was kind of inconsequential outside of online stuff, but getting cursed was this brutal debuff. DS2 has hollowing slowly wear you down, and cursing was just ticking off another chunk of your health. Instead of coming out the gate with a strong, clear, communicative role, your role is a stat you have to level up to be on par with the one from the first game. You can pump a ton of levels pretty quickly in DS2, but instead of feeling like some transcendent superhero, it feels like the bulk of those levels are just trying to reconstitute your body into operating shape. The game is talking to you through these mechanics people need to unproductively bicker about online. It's showing you how much things have withered. See, this is where the issues gets even more in focus for me. Anderson, maybe smartly in his case, straight up declines to talk about the story elements of the game. That sucks because it's lazy and shows off that he doesn't really value the narrative depth of the series, but it spares him the indignity of Matthew Matosas putting his entire foot in his mouth to opine on a story, the literary expression of which is totally lost on him. But, okay, not to hate on H-Bomb here as well, but this is a moment where I think he's overcorrected again. He mildly criticized Demon's Souls and DS1's opening crawls for just being a roll call of important names, and then kind of sidesteps the actual story elements of DS2 for the remainder of the video. Oh, he'll talk about imagery. He'll explain a really good point that the level design completes the thematic underpinnings of the game. He will discuss the big Vendrick reveal that the ending is supposed to be kind of unsatisfying, but there's a lot to the game that's expressed through the myriad characters you run across that's just left on the table. I get that he had different concerns, but this is the endless frustration of every video on the internet about these games, including my own now. The cultural discourse around it sucks everyone in like gravity, with maybe my Dark Souls rival Professor Bopper being one of the rare survivors of the curse. So, in an effort to try and right the vessel, do you all want to talk about how these games are kind of comedies? DS2 maybe most of all. Maybe I should explain what I mean. Okay, so several months ago I wrote and released a video that statistically no one saw about Bright Eyes, and in it I discussed the film adaptation of Uncle Vanya by Anton Chekhov. See, Chekhov's weird. I won't rehash everything I said before, but he wrote a bunch of famous plays, and people think about him because of his gun from memes, but notably his big, sweeping, miserable, Russian lit-ass plays were all labeled comedies by him. Maybe you can argue that he was just mocking the concept of genre or some high-minded shit, and to that, I would say to watch Vanya on 42nd Street, the film adaptation starring Wallace Shawn and Julianne Moore. It really gets to the heart of Chekhov's work, that it can be sharp and witty and funny in kind of a bitter and mean way. I think usually when people online discuss the coexistence of humor and tragedy, they tend to look at big examples, usually from Japan. Final Fantasy XIII has comic relief character Saz go through wacky hijinks and have a baby chocobo and also try to kill Vanille and himself. Big swings from lighthearted to tragic, but Chekhov's spin on it is so devilish. These big tragedies are incidental. They come at you obliquely. Events happening and the fallout happening maybe a time later. Big gushing outpourings of grief that go nowhere, accomplish nothing. The biggest change in Uncle Vanya happens when Vanya tries to kill Serebryakov, and it's almost funny because he aims the gun and fires twice and misses both shots. It's great. It's fucked up. There's pithy jokes about Vanya trying to kill himself like a scene or two later. The humor inherent to Chekhov's work is uncomfortable in a way because he had a real ear for a writing style that was painfully aware of the hypocritical contradictions of people, telling jokes amid tragedies, having these beautiful moments come crashing down for no reason in particular. It lends itself to a very intimate kind of read that's often overlooked in the reputation of his work and of classic Russian literature as a whole. Okay, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about this here, in relation to Dark Souls 2. After all, pulling apart the trivialities, the game's story kind of descends into an almost nihilistic decay. Let me ask a question. What is it that you actually accomplish in Dark Souls 2? Let's shelve the conversation about the Throne of Want. Sure, whatever, you sit on a chair. But leading up to that, what's happened, really? One of the most interesting things to me about Matthew's video, his seeming indifference to the story, is that it starts to reveal these gaping lapses in his consideration of a thing. And for what it's worth, H-Bomb simply gesturing to aesthetics isn't really the answer here either. Matthew complains about how NPCs don't leave the main hub, Majula, but never once gets to the point that they are in a stark contrast to the madness of the first game's NPCs. Dark Souls 1 concludes most of the NPC arcs in that game by them going hollow and needing to be put down, where the NPC quests in DS2 kind of fizzle out. There's something kind of disquieting that's just fully missed by the idea that DS1's quests were more violent and dynamic, something eerie and unsettling that Chloan's end state never resolves, the fact that she has wholly forgotten her father, who's like 10 feet away from her max. It's really tempting and easy to look at one of my favorite NPCs, Lucatil, as a big, clear statement on the nightmare present at the heart of every doomed traveler in this land. But it stands instead as a testament to her strength. Horrifically, she knows just enough to know that she's on the precipice of forgetting herself, her name, consumed momentarily in her quest to the point that things merely fade away. Dark Souls 1 presents hollowing as a frenzied madness, people consumed with their fixations until it turns them into senseless, violent beings. But DS2's take on hollowing is existential, horrific, the sheer incidental forgetting of yourself. So many merchants remain in Majula, Matthew, because absent their memories and their selves, they function the way they always have. Labor worked into the very sinews of the soul and the body, whatever remains. It's why Vendrick is a husk of a man when you meet him, a being constantly at the ready to defend his land, though absent the judgment to understand what that looks like. It's why Kale's only able to look upon his completed work and wonder as he loses full track of where he is, who you are, why Melentia comments that everyone seems to wind up here in Majula, the last and seemingly only peaceful village in Drangleic. There is definitely a way to read this game as deeply nihilistic in nature. So much of DS2 is built around the dissipation of experience, characters talking at you about the world like it makes sense, seemingly with no recognition that the world has long since given up sensibility. Meeting the assumed fraud Benhart, too scared to pass a petrified statue, but in Drangleic Castle, in the memories of the giant trees, places you fought some of the most powerful creatures still roaming the land to prove your worth, all without even the barest recognition of his assumed feats. There is no sense that anything matters. The Emerald Herald petitions you to break the curse, to link the flame by sitting at the Throne of Want, but what is broken exactly? You put Chandra to rest, you settle the anguish that ruined Drangleic, but the damage is seemingly irreparable. You're told that by sitting on the throne you link the flame, but it's never actually shown. Contrary to setting your moaning twink on fire in the first game, you sit upon the throne after walking on the backs of the subjugated giants and the doors close. In a way, the game cannot really give you closure on your actions, because anything that could have been done to spare Drangleic, this fate has happened so long ago already that you are essentially cleaning up the guilt and the regrets of people who have ended the world. And even in the second ending, even talking to Aldia, knowing that he has unearthed the truth of things, that our lies are lies, no matter how exquisite, is that truth meaningful? In the grand scheme of this world, this lie is ultimately inconsequential. His offered ending may be, what? True? Correct? The game is very much happy to explain these things, but again, there's just seemingly no point. A lie is a lie, but Aldia seemingly doesn't recognize that he is just as stricken as everyone else, just as lost with his purpose, his function, and how it is ultimately meaningless. You can leave and usher in an age of dark like before, end the line of monarchies that have tormented the land, but the damage is done. Link the flame or not. Who really cares? It's a truth, but it's an empty one. I don't know. Is there an answer here? I do think the games are funny. This one particularly so, beyond obvious silly characters like Gavlan, or the time you kick a snowball down a slope, or the time you get into a coffin to change your gender and nothing else, or the time you get to ride a coffin into the frigid outskirts, or the existence of giant horses that kill you in frigid outskirts. It's a funny game, but more closely to Chekhov's brand of twisted humor, finding it funny that a guy tried to steal morphine from a doctor, knowing that each pithy, snarky comment is just going to break these people apart, not finding a sense of irony to their predicaments, just wholly beholden to them and all that entails, the momentary joys and cavernous sorrows. And in the case of Dark Souls 2, the calming, overtaking darkness of indifference, of forgetting. The world is ending and no one's far enough from it to notice. An apocalypse that happens around us as we idle our time and wonder how we got here. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. Maybe there's a lore reason or something that can help us with this. Maybe even my friend and Dark Souls rival Professor Bopper knows. Maybe he's even here right now.
Can we prove with science that Nishandra has penis envy? Probably. Dark Souls is already chock full of Freudian imagery, ceaseless discharge, and Guinevere's illusory form, and don't get me started on Elden Ring. And in Dark Souls 2, the fragments of Manus, manifested as Nishandra and the three queens of the DLC, seek to manipulate the kings of various lands to the will of the Abyss. The queens of these lands occupy a strange space between human and automaton, a common fate for the inhabitants of Lordran, Drangleic, and Lothric. This drift towards automation and meaninglessness is nihilistic on its surface. Macduff forges because it's what he does. Vendrick wanders hollow in the crypt. The player kills and links the flame because that's all they know how to do. There's a mindlessness to the characters of Dark Souls 2, a surrender to the base animal nature of man as beings locked in a senseless struggle for survival, operating on instinct. However, the important word here is surrender. The nihilism of the characters is chosen. Like the uninformed player who links the flame because it sounds like a good idea, Vendrick gives himself up to the hollowing. Unlike his brother Aldia, he surrenders. He represents Socrates' unexamined life, the reverse face of Aldia's examined life. Most players sit on the throne. They sit because that's what instinct says to do, not because that's what they believe they should do. Aldia, for all of his nonsense, offers a struggle against the ages of fire and dark. Will it work? Probably not, but there's a reason why Vendrick is the hollow one. Alzheimer's is a complicated and not very well understood disease, but a key part of prevention and delaying its onset is mental stimulation, as if the life force itself demands self-driven purpose against the dark. The nihilism in Dark Souls 2 is a surrender to the dark, but it is not mandated. It is chosen. The endings of Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3 are very purposeful. You self-immolate or drive your grippers down the throat of the sexy firekeeper. Dark Souls 2 is a choice between purposefulness and purposelessness. For the careful player who follows Aldia's quest, he offers a way out of purposeless instinct, not by offering inherently good or successful ideas, but by offering something that pushes back against Drangleic's surrender to the fire and to the dark.
Stimulating work is always Bopper. I think the idea of willing surrender makes sense here, but even now I remain at least somewhat skeptical. Aldi's plight makes sense here as someone who is ascribing purpose to himself, and while he is wound up far more coherent than our fallen King Vendrick, hollowing is not an easy binary state. Cloanne's retained a physical manifestation of her humanity, but has forgotten her father, who himself looks more hollowed but remembers her all the same. Aldi has also been worn down to the function of his purpose, here to compel you to choose a purposeful life. I suppose that there is a difference between nihilism as an extension of a person's will and nihilism as a conclusion one draws from the outside looking in. Externally, as players, we can see the totality of Dreamlike and come to a nihilistic conclusion, something that doesn't map perfectly onto the willing choice the characters make to surrender to it, but I think that the premise is a little off, right? Isn't it? That we can read into it an undeniable nihilism. The game's tone, its vibes are more dreamlike, serene almost in places. Majula, yes, is an obvious pick, but the Shrine of Amana, the Horizon and Hyde's Tower of Flame, the game's not a blight or a dirge, at least not so brazenly and directly, but instead kind of a surreal beauty, a dream. Ishbal makes a big deal of the chaotic incoherence of the world, pathways building into transitions that are impossible, which is true, but he doesn't quite get at the kind of dreamlike quality of these transitions. Every step in the process in the immediate feels sensible, the sensibility of which only really unfurls with added perspective. Sure, the elevator into the sky at the top of a tower is a stretch, but that's been built up to by much more subtle impossibilities. Hyde's Tower walking us from way up above sea level into No Man's Wharf, the Well of Majula housing not just a poisoned town underneath, but also the rats and the Black Gulch and the Doors of Pharaohs. Dreamlike Castle has a path into a beautiful lake shrine, which is itself a path to a crypt that feels like it should be part of the castle since the king's buried there, his loyal knight standing guard. Maybe this is a failure of imagination on my part, but it's hard to read an authoritative qualifier of nihilism on a world made like this. And beyond everything else we can reasonably say about Dark Souls 2 and the series as a whole, it is that the developers understand that to make a Souls game is to make a game that cares deeply about its world as a manifested thing. Of course, digging deeper, there's more to this. How can there not be? Dreamlike has been stricken, taken with the darkness Nishandra brought to the kingdom, and as such, basically everyone in this land is slowly drawn towards it, in some manner or other. A great darkness rests at the bottom of the Well of Majula, the nexus point in the center of the village, and while some contend with the dark as something horrific, consuming, terrifying, just as many NPCs call the embrace gentle, soothing, comforting. Grandal finds it meditative and peaceful. Vendrick, for all the nightmare wrought upon his land, still finds fondness in his heart for his queen. On some level, Dark Souls 2 wants to believe in the illusion. There is an alluring, beautiful tragedy in this game. More than any, it was the game that compelled me to look upon the burnt-out sunset of Majula, to think about my character in ways that I just kind of didn't in the last two titles. I can retrofit these ideas back onto those playthroughs, but I can't help but feel that my character's every bit the same as the NPCs that idle about here. How could we not be? Everyone is slowly wearing down, things rubbing out gently until there's nothing, not even the recognition that you've lost things that mattered to you. How could this not be your fate too? How could it not be my fate? I know that I feel a panic in me whenever I realize that there are things I have truly forgotten, friends I fell out of touch with for reasons I can't recall. Every one of my grandmother's plates that break feels like an erosion of her memory, her reality left on this earth. I already can't go back, can't reassure her that I love her, that I miss her, that she may never understand me truly, but that I know that she would still care about me. Time is constantly eating at me, and I know that I will probably keep doing things like this, making art, making videos like these through summers in the future. It is what I do now. And I guess this game always makes me wonder if this is just who I am. To see the summer arrive, hotter every year, growing in intensity, a constant sign that maybe our world truly has ended, that things are just going to keep happening around me and nothing I could do alone could overthrow it. I only have the capacity to imbue my life around me with meaning, to try and make peace with regrets, to help others, to feel like maybe it's enough to just know myself, to be on this journey, even if I won't exactly know why one day. It's just, it's summer, and I'm thinking about Dark Souls. Special thanks to Alex Putanos, Alexi Angelica, Athena Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Enix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Foxy Hex, Gail Simmons, Grizz, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lappin, Nurai the Redmarked, Noun Verbally, Philip Pryor, Professor Popper, Rob Leon, Saint Rawberry, Tradegood, Trinant, TV's Ross, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.